All right, let's go straight to Sinao Tambo, who is the EFF Member of Parliament. Sinao, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning.
Morning. Greetings to your listeners, Clement.
So let's look at your proposals in a moment in as far as this division of revenue bill is concerned. But first, this postponement of the adoption of the committee report, what does this mean? Does this mean that over the next couple of days before the 6th of May, the proposals that have been put forward by you and other parties are going to be discussed, sent to the finance minister, and then the vote happens on the 6th? Just help our listeners understand what process unfolds now.
No, certainly, Clement. So yesterday, the Appropriations Committee met to consider the division of revenue bill, which essentially deals with allocations to national, provincial, and local government departments, so the three spheres of government themselves. So based on the revenue that will be generated through the outline established by the fiscal framework, then money gets allocated to national, provincial, and local spheres of government. So certainly it shouldn't pose a crisis, because the Economic Freedom Fighters proposed an amendment to the division of revenue bill which centers around a reprioritization of funds from national and provincial government, and also from spheres of non-core functions in local government and wasteful expenditure, such as the contracting of people who are doing outsourcing work in that sphere as well, to allocate that money to the local government sphere, because our understanding and appreciation is that local government is at the coal face of service delivery. So we are arguing for a reallocation of funds from national and provincial governments to increase the allocation for local government, which currently sits at 9.5%, and increase it to 14%. And we based the rationale for this amendment on various things. And one of that is that the basis for the equitable share formula is that it's based on an assumption that local government will generate revenue independently on the basis of taxation and water rates and property rates. But when it comes to rural and township municipalities particularly, is that people who are living there are not as resilient as those who live in urban municipalities in terms of their income, so that they don't pay for services of that nature, meaning that they struggle to generate revenue independently. So that assumption in terms of equitable share needs to be collapsed. But the second one as well is that the census data, which is the basis for the budgeting and planning for local government in particular, is based on 2010-2011 census data due to the challenges at Stats SA. So this means that the data and assessments by Treasury of how to allocate funding to local government is based on under-budgeting and underestimation of how many indigent households there are in municipalities as well. So the allocation needs to be increased in that regard because of all of these things that we outlined. That's what we outlined to the committee. So that what's going to happen now in terms of process is that the proposals by the EFF, the DA, I think, also made some proposals, will be sent to the Parliamentary Budget Office, the Financial Fiscal Commission, and the Minister of Finance for assessment, and they will return back on that. But on the second part as well, the committee sought a legal opinion as to the powers that the committee has to actually amend the Division of Revenue Bill and how far we can go in relation to other laws as well.
Okay, so part of your proposal, as you indicated, is to increase this allocation to local government from the current 9.5% to about 14%. But you're also against the austerity-based approach. So, I mean, the finance minister may argue, where am I going to get the money then to increase that allocation to 14%? Because you also don't want me to cut in other places.
Look, our argument is that there needs to be a cut at a provincial and national level. The basis, which is an argument the EFF has been making for a couple of years now, is that provincial government is an additional administrative layer of governance that doesn't really do much. So we don't understand why provincial governments get the allocations they get, whereas there's no real coal-face service delivery work that they do. So the cuts that we're basing, and we make a very vertical division of revenue proposal, is that, for example, currently we can cut about 39 billion from national government departments and 11.9 billion from the provincial departments in order to ensure that we allocate more money to local governments. So that's the precise cutting that we have proposed as well. But of course, the argument in the committee was that we don't have the fiscal experience or fiscal expertise to make the determinations of where these cuts would come from specifically in terms of those departments and what the impacts would be on national and provincial government. And as the EFF, we argue that we are politicians. When will we ever have that experience? But that shouldn't hinder us from amending the law, which is what the powers that were given in terms of the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Other Related Matters Act. So that is where the Parliamentary Budget Office and the Financial Fiscal Commission come in, because these are institutions that help standing committees on finance, standing committees on appropriations, to enable them to enforce the powers granted to them by the Money Bills Act. So that advice is going to be critical, and we're welcome to it, because eventually the sentiment in the committee, which I'm sure the chair of the Appropriations Committee will express as well when he speaks to you, is that we need to give more to the local government sphere. So it's about how do we recalibrate the budget to ensure that this sentiment is expressed.
What about the inefficiencies, though, at local government? You know about the wasteful expenditure, and I think over 3 years there was 190 billion rand that was reported by the Auditor General in irregular expenditure alone. That's just in the past 3 years. So while it's great to call for more funding towards local government, but how is that funding going to be used? Are we not going to sit with a problem where billions and billions are wasted in irregular expenditure because the systems are still broken at local government?
I think that's a conversation that the committee also had in earnest, and that's why we're also bringing in SALGA for consultation, the South African Local Government Association, to be able to establish control mechanisms and consequence mechanisms as well to local government and how they utilize funds which are allocated to them. So the second part of the proposals and interactions, which were more aligned to what the DA was proposing, is that municipalities that have been implicated in wasteful expenditure must have the same amounts which they have perpetuated in wasteful expenditure deducted from them and allocated to functional municipalities. Now, that can be something that can be perceived as politically motivated, because one may argue that the Democratic Alliance might believe that there's less wasteful expenditure in the Western Cape, and through their formula, a lot of money is going to be deducted across a lot of municipalities across South Africa and ultimately redirected to the Western Cape. So we're trying to approach it in a more neutral manner, but you are correct that there needs to be a mechanism to hold government accountable in terms of local government, in terms of how they use the money that is allocated to them. That is why SALGA is also part and parcel of the institutions we're going to consult with to ensure that how can we control what we allocate in terms of expenditure as well. And we need to do a whole reconstruction of the governance sphere of local government as well. We know how the coalitions are unstable. We know how they've also been utilized to perpetuate some levels of transactional relationships between political parties in some instances within internal political party interactions as well. So it's a conversation that needs to be ongoing, but the mechanisms to ensure that there's consequences for wasteful expenditure lie in rooting out corruption, lie in arresting those who perpetuate it as well, but also lie in Treasury having an instrument to ensure that they withdraw funds or freeze funds that are allocated to people who are implicated in wasteful expenditure.
Yeah. Just before I let you go, I want to ask you about one of the things that you have been calling for as the EFF, and this is something that one listener asked on the WhatsApp line earlier on, is about the call by the EFF for an apartheid tax for people who inherited wealth during that era. So what form would that take?
Look, our understanding and proposal in terms of what we made is that there were, one example of that is that there were trusts which were established pre-1994 in South Africa, and that those trusts and the wealth that was generated at that level, even in terms of property, was generated due to the unequal system of apartheid. So we are saying that the cumulative value of those trusts accumulated prior to 1994, which reaches up to 20 to 50 million, must be taxed at 1% once off as a form of generating a revenue that is going to be allocated to government for expenditure purposes. So all of the money that was accumulated in those trusts prior to 1994 must be taxed at a level of 1%. So that is what we're speaking about in terms of apartheid tax. So it's not the taxation of any businessman or anyone who had accumulated any money prior to apartheid, but it speaks specifically to a value of trusts, value of properties, and value of assets that were established on the basis of unequal laws developed throughout apartheid. So the notion that I've seen also, and I think perhaps we should also go on a much more larger educational and civic education about what we mean by that, is that the notion is that we're going to just blanketly tax white people, and that is not the case. It's going to be a targeted taxation of accumulated wealth through trusts, through properties, and through assets that were accumulated as a product of the unequal law systems developed by apartheid.
Right. So now, Tambo, EFF Member of Parliament, thank you for making time for us. It's 19 minutes now after 10.
You're with Clement.